One of the goals that President Obama hoped to accomplish in his first term was comprehensive immigration reform. And yet here we are in the last month of the first term, and that overall has been pushed off until next year. While for the millions of people living in the United States without documentation, this is an urgent problem, we cannot forget that immigration has a long and labored history in this country. And patterns and perception of American migrants have long been the fibers that weave together our national history. When we consider just the huddled masses who made their way through Ellis Island, 40% of Americans today can trace their ancestry to those who passed through Ellis Island from 1892 to 1954. Between 1815 and 1915, 30 million Europeans arrived in the United States, representing approximately 90% of the immigration to the U.S. in that period, the majority of whom hailed from Ireland and Germany. And in the 1840s, almost half of America's immigrants were from Ireland alone. In 1855, more than 50% of the population of New York, the first port of call for the majority of immigrants, was foreign-born. But attitudes were changing, and toward the end of the 19th century, just 1.6% of immigrants were Asian. But apparently, that was enough to push Congress to pass the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, restricting immigration from China for 10 years. As public opinion turned against certain kinds of immigrants in the early 20th century, more legislative restrictions began to take hold. In 1924, the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act was signed, which created a quota system for immigration. And the new rules put caps on the number of immigrants that could come to the U.S. from a particular country. The act also included a provision that made certain immigrants ineligible for citizenship based on race or nationality. By the middle of the 20th century, the face of immigration to the United States had begun to change. And by the end of the 1970s, a third of the foreign-born population of the country hailed from Latin America. Today, that trend has continued. In the last census, more than half the foreign-born population in the United States is from Latin America. And overall, almost 13% of the American population are new immigrants. By and large, our fellow Americans came through legal channels. Only 29% were undocumented migrants. Of those undocumented people, 86% have been living in the U.S. for 7 years or longer, many within what we might think of as traditional American families. 16.6 million Americans live in families with at least one undocumented immigrant. $1.5 trillion is the amount that could be added to our GDP over 10 years if the estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants already here are granted legal status. While we wait, approximately 1,087 people are deported every day by the Obama administration. Coming up, does the president owe a debt to the Dreamers?